So for those of you who have not been keeping up to date with the latest series of comics around Kylo Ren, we've just had the 8th issue of The Legacy of Vader, which has been following Kylo, through his story post The Last Jedi, and it's been kind of crazy. I did a video a few weeks back just reviewing what had happened up to issue 5, and even at that point, you see Supreme Leader Kylo Ren really unhinged. He gets kidnapped by a Hutt, he incites a rebellion on Naboo that he sides with and wins against the First Order and then kills all the rebels. And he's going on this journey with Vanne, who you may remember as Darth Vader's minion from Rogue One, who is now just a head in a jar, going to all of these places of importance through Vader's history, Naboo, Tatooine, to try and learn about his life. And it's, again, this crisis of identity for Kylo Ren. And in the latest few issues since I did that video, there's been even more, kind of interesting events take place. And there's been something that I never expected to happen, going all the way back to The Force Awakens, where we have the Force vision that Rey sees in Maz's castle. And we get that brief scene with Kylo and the Knights of Ren, and we don't learn much more beyond, the fact that it's a Force vision. We see Kylo stab someone, and that's kind of really it. We don't expect to learn more. Again, everyone was kind of disappointed that the Knights of Ren didn't really get much involvement from that point onwards. Even in The Rise of Skywalker, they're just there to be beaten. But this actually gives some extra context to what that scene is about, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But there's other stuff, such as a brand new leader of the Knights of Ren being introduced, and them revealing that there is a big rift between Kylo and the Knights, going back before The Force Awakens up until, The Rise of Skywalker. He actually wasn't the leader of the Knights of Ren, which again can be questioned as to, well, does that make sense from the perspective of, Snoke calls him the master of the Knights of Ren. I guess maybe from his perspective he was, but yeah, from before The Force Awakens, Kylo Ren was no longer the leader of the Knights of Ren. He betrayed them. And so that raises the question of, well, at the beginning of Rise of Skywalker, they seem to be following him again. So what's happened? We didn't even know that there was kind of this rift. So there's that to talk about. So again, let's just kind of run through this, because there's a lot to cover in these sort of 3 issues that have come out, because we go from Corellia to Jedi hunting to the Knights of Ren. So yeah, let's just take a quick look. So in the very first issue after what we'd covered with Naboo, which is issue number 6, we pick up at the Battle of Corellia, which, the First Order, they're trying to find resources to support their, galactic invasion. And so they've chosen Corellia because it is a shipbuilding facility. It's a planet full of resources. And we see that the battle is going really well. We get Hux, who's giving this really inspired speech to his, kind of colleagues in the First Order, and actually shows him to be a fairly competent and inspiring leader. And then, of course, Kylo Ren just comes in, all guns blazing in his TIE silencer, and just completely wipes out the Corellian forces, and kind of just, leaves Hux frustrated because he's been given this great speech, everything's going well, and Kylo Ren comes in like a madman and just takes all the credit. We see Kylo actually has his throne, and it is a very extravagant throne that he's actually quite happy with. The rest of that comic is him, sort of in Hux going back and forth. Hux isn't particularly pleased that, he never gets told about all these crazy things, and, he asks Kylo to keep him involved if possible. And then Kylo gets a call from Vanne, and, he says that he's found him a Jedi. So we're off into the next series of comics to go and hunt a Jedi, which is, an unusual thing considering the fact that we are almost 35, 40 years after Order 66, and Luke was seen as the last Jedi. So again, another pretty interesting reveal there that there's more Jedi than just Luke. So we lead into issue number 7, and it's Kylo going to a snowy planet, and again, being as impatient as ever, he doesn't have the tolerance to play the undercover game, so he basically delves into the mind of a barman, which, brings out the supposed Jedi, whose name is Grandea, and she is grand because she looks like a grandmother, really. She's, as you would imagine, quite old, and she just whips off, Kylo's lightsaber like it's no effort whatsoever. And they end up having a fairly lengthy conversation where, she takes him through the history of Order 66 and her experiences and how she survived. She got rid of her lightsaber, she got rid of her robes, and she had to depend upon her, force powers to survive. She would use mind tricks and mind wipes to essentially erase the memories of anyone who she came into contact with. And she talks about getting so good at it that she's able to, mind wipe a Toydarian, which, as we know, I'm a Toydarian, mind tricks don't work on me. That's my one good impression, by the way. I've got no other good Star Wars impressions, so that's the one that I do. And, she ends up encountering some Inquisitors, and she even manages to convince them that they've killed her when, in fact, they haven't. And this is kind of all important because, she's talking to Kylo about how she's seen into his head, and he is so insecure. He ends up trying to fight her. He thinks he's killed her, and he actually hasn't. And we don't really know by the end of it what is going on. She seems to be a bit like a Force ghost, but then she's not. She's gone. So whether he killed her or not, I'm not 100% certain. It should also be noted that this is where he learns that, Luke Skywalker is dead. He didn't know that. And she basically, calls him out for not being connected to the Force and realizing that, hey, the most powerful Force user of the last, however many years has died and you didn't feel it. What are you, some kind of chump? So yeah, it's quite interesting that this is where he learns, that Luke died. Very similar to how Vader learns that Luke is his son in a comic or a novel as well. Those kind of important moments take place off screen. And so we come to issue 8, which is the one that's just been released this week, and it starts off pretty, kind of straight in your face. It's pretty much like, hey, here's the new leader of the Knights of Ren, Tava or Tava, I don't know how it's pronounced, Ren. And she's a woman, and she's got a really cool mask. She's got a really cool outfit. And she is, again, on the lookout for some loot. She's taken the knights to an unknown planet, and they end up encountering more resistance than they expect. And so the Knights of Ren run and leave her behind. And she's not particularly pleased about them, turning tail and not following her orders, essentially abandoning the leader of the Knights of Ren. And this is where they start to tell her about the previous leader, who was Kylo Ren. I was sat here thinking, when I was reading this, I was like, okay, maybe she is a leader before the original Ren. And then I realised, actually, no, because there's some members of the Knights of Ren here who weren't there when the Ren was the leader. They came in at the time when Kylo took over. So, they talk her through the kind of fight between Ben Solo, that's Zuko, sorry, he's having a bit of playtime. So they talk him through, Ben Solo and how he journeyed with them, killed Ren, became the leader. They talked about how, he was hyper-focused and times were really good under him, but then even he got too dark for the Knights of Ren. At that point you're like, holy shit, he's too dark for the Knights of Ren. That's saying something. And then they talk about what happened. And you see this scene where they talk about how they'd been given essentially, a bounty to fulfill. And they went to this planet, which, again, I don't believe is named. And they land. It's exactly the same as the scene that you see in The Force Awakens, where it's the muddy, rainy planet that's kind of in the middle of a battle, and you see Kylo stab someone through the chest with his blade, and they even reference him seeing what could be, the Force echo of Rey, until, dun dun dun, Snoke shows up. Just out of nowhere, Snoke is there, and it's at this point that Kylo turns on the Knights of Ren, and Snoke orders them to be hunted down and killed. And that's kind of where they leave off. They say we had to run, and they come back into the present. And at this point, it's kind of like, okay, so we are now in between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. And it's clear that Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren are definitely not on speaking terms. They, he's betrayed them. So how is it in the short time leading up to The Rise of Skywalker, how is it they come back together? And that's where we're heading now. And we see at the very end of the comic that Tava Ren ends up on the finalizer with the rest of the Knights of Ren. and she is there to, you think, confront Kylo, but then she bends the knee. However, it does tease that they're going to fight in the next comic, so I think clearly, this is another character who is there to be defeated by Kylo Ren. There's going to be some reconciliation between the Knights of Ren and Kylo Ren. But it's an interesting twist in the tale. And again, just in these three kind of issues, we see that the First Order's invasion is continuing apace. Kylo is still disjointed, impatient, and chaotic, erratic. We see that there are more Jedi still out there than Luke, even if they don't classify themselves as Jedi. And we see that there's more to the tale of the Knights of Ren than we thought. There's a new leader. And again, I think she actually has, I'm looking at a picture now, and she does have the Ren, the lightsaber. So interesting. I don't know if there's going to be more background given to this Tava Ren. Again, I don't know the pronunciation. But I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen. But I just thought it was kind of strange how that one scene from a decade ago that I never gave much more thought to. Again, I remember seeing that in the trailer and getting really, really excited about it because I thought, my God, that looks great. It looks very atmospheric. You've got the Knights of Ren. You've got Kylo Ren. There's going to be some kind of a showdown maybe between Luke and, one of the maybe apprentices that he has. It never really turned out to be that way. It was a disappointing kind of tease. It was just a vision. And then we didn't get much of the Knights of Ren from that point until the last film where, as I've mentioned, they were just kind of like cannon fodder. They were just there to stand around and then get beaten up. So I never really thought we'd get much more context to that. But as it turns out, it was an actual real event. Whether it was in real time, I doubt it, because, again, it feels like Rey must have journeyed or echoed into the past somehow. But that was the turning point for Kylo as well as Rey, I guess. Maybe that's what it was trying to infer, that was Kylo's turn against the Knights of Ren, a defining point in his young life there. And this was Rey's defining point because she's seeing into the Force for the first time. Who knows? But yeah, that's where we're up to. We've got 2 more issues left, so whatever else crazy happens, I'll try and keep you up to date. But yeah, if you are reading it, let me know what you think of it in the comments. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and I will see you for the next video.